Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Levin. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. My guest in this episode is Joshua Levin, and we are talking about risk management aspects of in vitro diagnostic devices, especially in a small startup environment. Josh has done R&D in this field, and he has also been at the US FDA in a reviewer capacity, as well as in the post-market surveillance area. And currently, he is a regulatory consultant advising innovative startups in the IVD space. So he is the best person to have a conversation about this. We talked about this topic in front of a live audience as part of a LinkedIn live audio event, and you are about to hear a recording of this conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. We're going to be talking about IVDs, particularly from a risk management point of view, from a regulatory point of view. And the reason why I'm excited to have a conversation with Josh about this is because he has done it all. He has done R&D, he has been with the FDA, both as a reviewer and as a leader in the post-market space, and now as a regulatory consultant and advisor to innovative small companies developing great technologies in the IVD space. So he has seen it all. And I'm actually going to set our stage in the context of a Class 1 recall that was announced recently on FDA's page. It is related to a blood test that measures troponin levels. And it is used, and Josh can go into a lot of technical details about that, but my understanding is it's a very important test because it allows a doctor to see if someone is going to have a heart attack. And you can imagine, if we don't measure these troponin levels correctly, and we misdiagnose it, someone can die. So this was a Class 1 recall. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the perspective on risk management and the regulatory side with Josh. So I hope you will find this equally exciting and participate in this conversation when we open up. So Josh, with that, I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining me today. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thank you, Naveen. And I'd like to say that my career is sort of an industry and FDA sandwich. So I started in industry and product development and moved to FDA as a reviewer and then a post-market team lead. And then I returned to industry in regulatory and quality roles, working with small companies. And like you, I enjoy the educational parts of my job where I get to work with colleagues or partners in various small companies or mid-sized companies and help them with anything related to quality systems, risk management, and regulatory strategy. So I wanted to, I did get a chance to listen to Naveen's excellent podcast on Easy Medical Device and the Easy Medical Device podcast. And I wanted to refer everybody to that because Naveen really does an excellent job of laying out what you do about risk management when you have a very small team or you're a startup and you've been told to do risk management and you need to get started. So I think, and Naveen also provides an important public service in holding these sessions.
Thank you, Josh. So, before we get into the recall case that I really want to talk about, I think I want to just invite your thoughts on where this field is going. I know we talk about IVDs, but diagnostics as a field, I think is going to just really grow because we have now software-based diagnostic devices, artificial intelligence, machine learning. They are becoming part of really almost everything we do in our life, precision medicine, right? So what's your high level, 30,000-foot level on where the industry is going?
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. So if you think about medical devices as being basically therapeutic devices and diagnostic devices, the kind of things we're going to talk about related to IVDs really apply to all diagnostic devices. So that might be SAMD, software as a medical device that's focused on the diagnostic application, even if it's not an IVD, or say a wearable where there's a strong diagnostic component. And all of these things, the risk management strategy is very similar. There's just tremendous innovation going on in this area. A lot of it is pandemic driven, and the fact that the companies are looking more for at-home tests or complex tests, using complex technology or different software apps. And a lot of these companies, especially in the IVD space, are small and startups. Maybe they come out of a university and they're just learning how to spell FDA. And for risk management, they're looking for what do we need to do practically? We don't need to know all the theory, but what are the practical approaches?
Yeah. So we're going to see a lot of action in this space, and that's why I think this conversation is very important. So let's talk about this class 1 recall about the troponin levels in this cardiac panel test. And just very briefly, could you describe what that is and why it is such an important test?
Sure. So troponin is kind of an oddball among IVDs. So many IVD products are aids in diagnostics. So it's not the be-all and end-all. So we'll talk about severity scoring and how that's applied. When you think about severity scoring and what the harms are, it's very important to understand the clinical context, the intended use of the device. And again, for most IVDs, you'll rarely have a severity level of 5, which is serious injury or death to the patient. It's not like an implantable that will could kill a patient if there's an infection. An IVD is run outside the body, and so it's inherently less risky. But troponin is one of the rare exceptions where there's a test that is directly measuring a risk of a heart attack. So the troponin analyte is really one of the main tools the doctor uses to determine if there's a myocardial infarction going on. And if a false negative result is returned, the doctor could send the patient home from the hospital, and the patient could have a heart attack and die. So when at FDA, we would have a weekly recall meeting, and we would discuss recalls and what classification the recall should be. And there was tremendous dialogue among the medical officers. They'd get very passionate about it, and troponin was often the star of the show. And I think there was general agreement that a false negative troponin would be a class 1 recall, which is the highest risk recall. Just for confusion, the classification of recalls goes in the opposite direction of medical device classification. So class 1 recalls are the most risky. So generally, we would agree that if there's a possibility of false negative results, that was a class 1 recall, which there's a much higher burden on the company in terms of interaction with FDA and press releases and the like. It's a big deal.
So basically what I'm hearing you say is that at the submission review stage, they would have higher expectations of sensitivity, specificity, performance. And in post-market, they will have a higher expectation of monitoring for false negatives, right?
Right. And this is we could have a lot more discussion on this, but if you look at sensitivity and specificity of troponin, FDA expects a very high sensitivity and really a moderate specificity. And this is the opposite of some other products we could talk about where specificity is very important, including products you wouldn't really expect.
So that's a false negative versus false positive kind of emphasis, right? In this case, false negative is very important. So let me ask you this. You briefly mentioned the severity assignment, right? So let's play this scenario. We are building a troponin-based test, and we come across potential hazardous situations that could be a false negative or a false positive. How would we go about, thinking about harms and severities in those cases?
So I always, first of all, recommend building severity levels into the risk management plan. That way, when it comes time to actually scoring hazards, you've got the numbers right there, and the scoring is very easy.
Okay.
The severity scoring is very tied into intended use of the device and the clinical use. So for something like troponin, we would probably have a discussion about where do we score on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most severe, the harms of a false negative. And we'd probably end up somewhere between a 4 and a 5. And then, well, what are the harms of a false positive result? Because a false positive result just means the doctor thinks the patient has a heart attack, but they really don't. So they'd be treated for a heart attack and the risk level's fairly low. And then we'd say, well, what about a delay in result? And how would that, what harm would that cause? And are there maybe differences between a delay where you just run the, for some tests, not troponin specifically, but if you had to say, take a tissue biopsy, then if you had to go and get another biopsy, that could be a more severe risk.
Yeah.
But for troponin, we might say like a delay in results is like a severity level of a 1 or a 2. And we would put that into our risk management plan. And then again, when it comes time to score the hazards in an FMEA, for example, we would have those scores ready to go.
Got you. So you are basically, taking a pretty high-level system view. You are thinking about delayed results, false negative, false positive. You're thinking like you're really sort of focusing your activities on core sort of hazards, very important hazards. That's a good point. And you're saying build it into the plan so that there's no confusion.
Yeah, and for IVDs, those are really the 3 key harms: false negatives, false positives, and delay of results. There's a little bit of risk to the operator for some tests, but you don't have the wide variety of potential harms that you would with a therapeutic device like an implant. It's actually pretty straightforward. The different, there's a lot of things that go wrong, but there's only a few effects on the patient.
That's right. And then you have to build back the sequence of events and the initiating mechanisms that lead to those effects. And that's where a lot of engineering and scientific activity will happen. That's perfect. So now, in this particular case, troponin, class 1 recall, and I was looking at the recall announcement, I came across like they had about 40 complaints. So I wanted to ask you, like, let's say doing post-market, and how would you even start to think about introducing a sense of urgency? Like, is 40 complaints and then taking action sort of reflects the right sense of urgency in your mind? I don't want to go into too many numbers, but how would we even trigger a signal or and sort of a decision-making process when you have something as serious as this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, and I know the IVDR regulations tried to address that. FDA does leave that up to the company. And FDA could see a signal, say, from a lot of medical device reports and request the company do a recall or at least suggest the company do a recall. But it's really up to the company to have some sort of internal process of generating that signal. And QA may not necessarily have oversight into that process. There has to be some sort of system built in where the people who are assessing those complaints can elevate it to QA. A lot depends on the company and the size of the company. And a small company, hopefully everybody works together and there's a discussion about these things.
And because here's the difficulty I think might we be faced with, like, is that it's a false negative. And how do we know it's a false negative until we have some other result? So, people who are taking complaints, they don't have the ability to kind of really diagnose the situation. You need technical experts who say, hey, I've heard this before. This is most likely a false negative. We need to escalate this, right?
Yeah.
So we need involvement of real experts into the complaints sort of evaluation investigation process.
Yeah, and I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but we could discuss sort of how you build that triage system into your complaint system and how you make sure things are elevated that need to be elevated.
Perfect. I hope people would be interested in that, and maybe somebody shares some insights or ask a question about this. So, Josh, I know before I open up the floor for conversation, I had one kind of last question for you. Your perspective and insights on how to manage this in a small company environment, because I think that's going to be of interest to a lot of people.
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. I wanted to reiterate some of the things you said in your podcast with Munir and Easy Medical Device. So really a good place to start is with the training perhaps and the procedure. So if you take ISO 14971, if you're somebody just learning risk management, first of all, attend Levin's classes, and then look at the 14971 standard and try to write a procedure based on the standard. And when you write your procedure, you want to think about, what does this look like in your company? 14971 is very generic.
Yeah.
How would you proceduralize that in your own company? And then from there, you generate a and the procedure is for all products your company might develop. And then you go from there and you write a risk management plan. And there's a lot of great consultants for risk management. I can help, Levin. There's lots of people who can help. The way I work with small companies that I work with is to first do a training. I do a training that is to 14971, but also more practically, what does an FTA look like, an FMEA? And we could talk a lot more about the use of these tools for IVDs. That would be a whole other topic.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Josh, because I know Christy Johnson is in the audience, and Christy and I had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago. She also starts by training people. Get everyone on board first. Let's not get confused by so much of stuff out there. Let's build a common understanding is what I'm hearing you say. Excellent. I know we're going to have a lot of good conversation about this, guys, so don't hold back. You have already joined me here on the stage, so I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts. Go ahead, please.
Now, I was just interested in hearing Joshua's opinion about when you have an issue like that, which you very well said that needs more investigation. How would you enter into conversation with FDA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, let's say it was the case of the Class 1 recall for troponin. FDA is going to be very interested in what your kappa was and what your root cause analysis showed. In this case, I believe it was a raw material, which is a very common problem. A whole other topic of conversation is control of suppliers and raw materials. But FDA would want to know very specifically for a Class 1 recall, what was the issue, what is the root cause, what is the company doing about it, and how can it be corrected?
And we would expect, when it comes to raw materials, we would expect those controls to be already established, right, Josh?
Yes, but of course, with suppliers, things can always go wrong.
Right.
And, there are things, Yeah,
so in the kappa plan, actually, we would like to see what additional things you are doing to investigate other potential failure modes in the same area that you may not have captured. So the advice here is that don't just copy paste from your FMEA, say this is what we are doing, this is the controls.
Right.
Show to the FDA that you are thinking beyond what you thought before. So hold that thought.
FDA,
go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing about that. FDA wants to see systemic corrective action. So just because if this was an issue with this product, FDA want to know, well, do you know how this affects other products? Or is this a one-time only thing, or other reagents, things like that? So
all right.
They definitely want to see a systemic approach.
All right.
So
go ahead, Per. Go for a follow-up.
My question was I completely get what you're saying, but as we all know, some of these investigations will take time, and then time is of the essence always. And once we initiate a PFA and say, okay, we'll shut this down, then all the questions starts coming. But honestly, we don't know until the correct people have investigated this what is really going on, whether it's a supplier issue, whether it's a systemic issue, or whatever. So that was more the point of my question is, how do you enter into dialogue with the FDA?
Yeah, I mean, at least when I was at FDA, we had a number of situations like that, and we would continue working with the company. The recall doesn't get terminated until, I think, like 6 months later. There's a whole process, but FDA will continue to have dialogue with the company, especially for a Class 1 recall, if the corrective action, the kappa is under review or investigation.
And also, Josh, isn't it right that if they are not very happy with your follow-up and all, there will be more actions, even though you might close the recall, right? It's possible that they have you now in their sites, like they're going to be reviewing what's happening in the marketplace. Okay, so hold that thought, guys. Please please hang in there. Okay, if you have time, now I'll let you share more insights. But I'm going to invite Christy now. Please go ahead, Christy, and share what you have in mind.
Sure. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
So much fun listening to you. I do a lot of work in kind of the same space. And my question for you is just your experience with IVDs, I've done a lot with the NIH's RADx program, Rapid Acceleration Diagnostics. And one of the things we did super early on with all the little teams is like we do the preliminary hazard analysis and then we pause and we say, okay, let's now do like a fault tree analysis of false and negative. And I was just wondering, like, what do you do for early teams and what are your best practices for identifying, like you said, like the big three, false neg, false pause, and invalid or no result?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do early on to flush out the best information in those categories?
No, that's a great question. And we end up having a lot of discussions up front, with the company, and what does a false positive or false negative really look like in the clinical practice? And sometimes they don't really understand their own device and how it's used clinically. And so those conversations I think are really helpful. And like, what exactly are you developing here? Because this is early development, and it helps them get a better understanding. It ties in closely to the requirements. And in terms of your approach of doing a fault tree, I like that. This is kind of a separate conversation about what tool to use for IVDs. And it depends a lot on what the device actually is.
And also, Josh, I think I would also say that it has to be an iterative, ongoing process, right?
Absolutely.
We can't just do a PHA and a preliminary FMEA or FDA and then stop. Because like Christy, I'm sure you have done that too in your practice, facilitate an ongoing process, because we will learn more during development. Right? 14971 tells us to start with intended use, foreseeable misuse, characteristics related to safety, hazardous situations, right? It doesn't mean that we stop there. So I think we would like to involve our clinical folks early, have the conversation about, hey, how would people even know there's a false positive, false negative? What should they be looking for? So great conversation there, guys. David, I'm going to now invite you to share your thoughts. And John, I know you've been trying, so please hang in there. I'll invite you in a minute.
Thank you, Naveen. And thank you, especially Joshua. This is a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
I was curious when you were talking about signals and basically scanning the horizons post-market. You're getting analog things, you're getting digital things, you're getting stuff from all over the place. How do you digest that? And do you use formal methods, or is it more ad hoc from one to another? I'm just curious about your process.
Well, that's a great question, and I'll be honest to say that most of my work is with small companies and design controls, early design. So it's something for a lot of the companies is sort of way off in the future. But it is something that has to be considered. At the way, at least the IVDR and the post-market surveillance methods described in the IVDR actually do a good job of this. FDA is kind of weak in terms of its post-market system, but at least looking at the way IVDR describes it, that you have to look at both passive data and active data. So passive data meaning MDRs or vigilance reports, recalls, field corrective actions, and those are and complaints, and those are all your passive data. And then you actually have to go out and proactively collect data, whether it's through new clinical studies or marketing, and I think that's the part that at least the FDA regulated companies don't do, and will have to learn to do under IVDR.
Yeah, and to that, what I will add, Josh and David, I know many people struggle with that, and it applies in general. I think you need to not only build good data analytical capabilities, and I know that you can do that, but you also need to build a decision-making process. I built a post-market surveillance system from scratch about 10 years ago, and we did very smart, sophisticated statistics on signals. And the very first time we did that, we found 30 potential signals in a very mature product. So we said, this is, we have to figure out what is important, what is not important. And for that, you need to involve your clinical specialists, your engineering folks, people who have technical know-how to be able to separate signal from noise. And that's where, if you just follow the regulations, you will miss that, because regulations are not going to tell you how to do it. You need to do both. You need to do what Josh described. You need to build data analytical capabilities and decision-making process. So we can talk a lot more, I know, for sure on this. But it's a very big area of challenge for a lot of people. Post-market, doing it well, doing it in a compliant, efficient way is very, very challenging. So guys, we still have about 5 minutes or so. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts on this, please raise your hand. I know, John, you were trying, but for some technical difficulties, we are not able to bring you on. So Per, let me just open the floor again and see if you had any other follow-up since you are still here.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So John Conway sent me his question by LinkedIn mail, and he's saying that, agreed that the risk management plan needs to provide detail on the severity of harms, but beware only including this in the RMP and not an SOP as well. Severities need to align with harm from a systematic standpoint to ensure alignment between products. So I guess John is trying to make a point that there might be a portfolio of devices which may be addressing harms of different severities. And if you put everything in one risk management plan, it may not translate well. I think that's what I'm hearing in his comment. Josh, do you see anything else there that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It depends on the company. And one thing, the risk management plan is supposed to be product specific, while the SOP applies to all the products in the company. So if you want to put severity scoring into the risk management SOP, you have to think about, well, what if I develop another kind of product in the future that I'm not thinking about today? And we've seen this with some companies who thought they were only developing products in a particular area and then branched out. So you do want to make your SOP, I think, very general, so that it's not specific to a particular kind of product. Like, let's say you're developing an IVD today, and then tomorrow you go and develop a therapeutic medical device. It could happen.
I totally agree with you, Josh. And what I have kind of practiced is make the SOP general in the sense that it must require evaluation of hazards, harms, and severities at the product level. And then and then you create a standard record of harms, hazards, and severities that you can use after updating each time according to the product. And that record gets referenced into your risk management. So I think you don't want to change your SOP too frequently, right? I think that would not work very well. So
now, one thing some companies do, I'll say, is they will have a standard risk acceptability table in the SOP. And then in the risk management plan, you could go see, if you're just going to use the standard risk acceptability table, you can do that. Because that shouldn't change too much from device to device.
No. So I know we are running short of times, and Rick, you have joined us. I'm going to give you the last question. Go ahead, Rick. Rick, can you? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Josh, great conversation. I don't know if I have a question, but more of a thought. In the conversation, we talked about what the FDA would do, and quickly we went to a cap on the root cause analysis and then training and the procedure. And a thought occurred to me that those are the basic fundamental things that a quality management system should have. But when you get to, for example, the procedure, well, yes, it's got to be general in a sense. There's got to be a work instruction, because the procedure is more informational guidelines, and you have to have a how-to. And one of the things that as an auditor that we catch a lot is you'll take a risk management procedure or a CAPA or a calibration or a validation, and the training is read and understand. And that is clearly false in the sense of these are very difficult subjects. They have a lot of nuances. And the idea of having a general procedure and then say, you just read the procedure and you're trained, that doesn't work. So you got to be careful on the training piece.
So Rick, I know
Naveen, I have a lot to say about this, but
I know you don't. But I know we are running short of time. But Rick, I do appreciate that you made that point. And with your experience in auditing and helping folks really improve, I'm just thinking out loud that why aren't more auditors flagging that? Why is it not happening that they're telling their auditee? Maybe there is a environment or a vibe that it doesn't happen, but I would expect them to not really settle with read and understood, right? I would expect them to find something. So hopefully that'll improve in future. So guys, I know we have very little time left. I'm going to give Josh a couple of minutes to collect his thoughts and share some key takeaways with us for this conversation. But in the meantime, I would like to invite you guys to subscribe to the Let's Talk Risk newsletter, because you can catch up on the past conversations. We have recordings, we have articles. You will find the link for subscription in the comments section for this event page. Please go and subscribe and be a part of this community. Second thing I would say is, if you have something to share, and I know you do, I know all of you have so much insight and experience to share, please contact me. And if you would like to be a guest on this conversation, it's not a podcast. Josh, no preparation, right? No preparation needed?
Right.
It was only a 10-minute conversation. So it's very easy, very simple. Come and join us and have your insights be shared broadly. I really invite you for that. And finally, tell your friends to join these conversations every 11 a.m. Eastern on Friday. With that, Josh, you have the floor. Final comments, please.
Okay, so my final comment is, know what device you're developing. What's your intended use? What's the clinical use of your device? This is important, particularly important for technology developers who often have a platform technology and they're not sure what device they're developing. So you could have the same technology, different devices, different intended uses, different risk management. So that's really my key take home from today's session.
Got you. Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate you sharing your insights. Really thankful to you. Everybody who participated and came on board is also have my great appreciation. And with that, I think, guys, we have run out of time. So I invite you to join me again next week. We're going to have a very interesting conversation on clinical evaluation and state of art, most likely. So please join us next week and be a part of this conversation on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.